G'day there guys, it's your Aussie Hubby Markee, back at it again with another r/revenge video. Now if you love me like I love you, then you know what to do. I want you to mosey on over to that old like button and tackle it like Crocodile Dundee. Maybe even chuck an Aussie flag down in the comments. Now with that said, I want you to sit back, relax, chuck a prawn on the barbie, and get ready for some bloody good revenge. Now, our first post is by user Biblo, titled, "Several years of harassment caused her to lose a job and her kids." This is my first post ever, so apologies if it's not up to standards. Long-time lurker on this site, so I figured I might as well tell my story. Here is some backstory for you. Several years ago, my mum was dating this nice man with 2 kids. My younger brother and I liked the boyfriend himself, but his kids were another story. His kids were entitled jerks that always got what they wanted, constantly stole our toys, and were generally a nuisance to be around. I always tried to be a better person, but my brother and I were constantly getting into arguments with them due to their pettiness. They weren't even the worst part of the relationship. The boyfriend's ex-wife was. From my perspective, I felt that she was the type of person that if she couldn't have him, nobody could. She made my mother's and our lives hell, constantly filing false complaints about our side of the family, generally pointed at my brother and I, from harassing to claiming I had stolen the son's toys, which was the other way around, and going after the boyfriend claiming that he was an unfit parent. Several times she would try and ruin any plans that we had come up with. For example, after spending months planning a trip to New York, last minute she blew a fuse, and demanded we cancel the trip so that she could take her own trip with them. We had already gotten written agreement from her. One time, she even demanded the oldest son and I visit a family therapist. After pointing all the blame on me, I told my side of the story. It resulted, without the therapist fully implying, that they agreed I was in the right and them storming out of the room. Among many other reasons, even after my mum and her ex-boyfriend had gotten engaged, the ex-wife was one of their biggest reasons why mum had decided to call off the engagement. The harassment and drama were just too much for us. It broke her heart to do so, but she made us the priority and got us out of that situation. A few years after the breakup, my small family and I were living happily. I never saw the kids or the dude again. My mum had still kept in touch with the former boyfriend, but after some time apart, she's seen the faults in him too. I was in the 8th grade and living life happily. That was until the ex-wife stepped into gym class one day. Apparently, since the breakup, she had gotten her teaching degree and became a substitute teacher. She was now replacing our normal gym teacher who was on maternity leave, as well as acting as the assistant teacher for our health and sex ed class. Basically, I now had to see her pretty much every other day for the rest of the school year. At first, she didn't recognize me. Puberty had hit me hard, changing my appearance drastically, especially for someone who hadn't seen me in like 5 years. Eventually, she recognized my name, and that's when the harassment began anew. All of it was snide remarks about my appearance, constantly pointing me out as an example as to what puberty can negatively do to you. Pimples, facial hair, voice cracking, that sort of stuff. To the class, as if I was the only one dealing with it. The main health teacher didn't know about it either. Basically, everyone in the 8th grade was taking sex ed at the time. It was technically one extremely large class, but split up into male and female groups. And wasn't I lucky that the ex-wife got the male half, which was mine. I told my mum about it immediately, and she was livid. She sent multiple emails to the school requesting that they switch teachers, or at least let me take the class online. It all fell on deaf ears, until with the help of the ex-boyfriend, we showed them dozens of emails, phone calls, and messages, all spouting harassment to my family and I. This resulted in her being fired from the school and basically being blacklisted from our school district and the surrounding area. If she wanted another teaching job, she would have to find it elsewhere. This resulted in a major legal battle between her and the ex-boyfriend, because she had tried to move out of state with the kids without his nor the court's permission. Apparently, she lost custody of the kids and had to go back to her old job. Don't know what it was. All in all, it was an interesting experience. We cut all ties with that entire family after the whole ordeal and went on with our lives. I was now a sophomore in college waiting out the lockdown in my state. While my mum still hasn't had a long-term relationship since then, mostly sticking to online dating. One of them turned out to be a pedo, but that's a story for another day. But she's happier than she's ever been in a long time. Thank you for reading. As stated before, I've never done something like this, so I apologize for any issues. I thought you might all enjoy a new story during these trying times. Edit. Thank you all for the kind words. This is literally the first post ever, so I agree that it is very borderline pro. I'd just like to make it clear that my mother and I had no real involvement with her losing custody. All we had wanted was to get me away from her at school. There was a whole lot of other things that led to it. Her being fired could have just been the last thread. For those of you wondering, I had mentioned something about a pedo near the end. It's really short. Basically, a few months after another breakup, my mum finds out that this ex, not the ex-fiancé in the story, was arrested for trying to sleep with a preteen. Oh, you love to hear it, don't you? That's just marvelous. Alright, and our next post is by user DesRep2. Cross post from malicious compliance. Don't tell people how to do their job, if you don't know how it should be done. As the title says, this was originally posted in malicious compliance, but I was suggested to post it here. If this doesn't belong here or is better suited for another revenge thread, let me know. Standard warnings. I ain't a native English speaker, so don't eat me over poor spelling/grammar. So, backstory. I used to work at a factory who suffered severely under a director who wanted to make more money, with little idea as to how you run a factory, or how you see through people trying to BS you to gain favor. One person in particular was notorious for licking buttholes. When I started, he was the boss for about a third of the production unit. And as it happened, he was also the guy who took over whenever my boss needed time off, was out liaising with other companies, or otherwise wasn't on company grounds. This guy had a massive superiority complex and couldn't handle being wrong, or having made a mistake. And just to make it better, he was also clueless about quite a lot of things outside of the machine shop, where he was the boss. Safe to say my partner and I really disliked him, and made an active effort to work against his stupidity whenever he was our acting boss. So as for the story itself, my partner and I made up the company goods reception and quality control department. Basically, our job was to receive the goods and inspect that everything was in order, correct amount had been delivered, no transport or production damage or mistakes, and then prepare the things for storage. But as you might expect, sometimes things weren't quite in order, some things were unimportant, and we just ignored them. Most things we send to them to get repaired, since most mistakes were fixable, and then send a bill to the contractor who was hired for the job. And a few things we discarded because they were broken beyond what we could repair. And this particular ass clown was allowed to greenlight things that my partner and I had sent in to get repaired. So, one day, the director comes out with the head of productions behind him, wanting to know why a particular type of good from a particular contractor always got sent in for repair. And I do mean every time. And we explained that because Purchase opted to use the cheapest place to get these things done, quite frankly, one particular part was subpar, but it could be fixed so it wasn't really a big deal. He wasn't happy with that explanation and wanted someone who knew of such things to have a look at it. Cue Mr. Ass Clown himself, who takes one look at it and goes, "Oh, those are bloody perfect, right as they're supposed to be." And the director tells us to send them on their way. My partner, a fairly temperamental guy, was furious, but we made a plan. And so, Ass Clown and director left, but head of production stayed behind. With every piece of goods we received, we would pull the schematics in order to measure if everything was in order or not, and then on the schematic, we would write some addition information, purchase number, steel certificate, etc., so that we could easily trace everything back, should there be a problem. And for this particular thing, we drew an arrow to the part that was done incorrectly, wrote what the problem was, and said, "Approved by Mr. Ass Clown." We asked the production manager to sign it, and off the goods went. 5 minutes later, we got a call from storage. So what's the deal with these goods? Why ain't they in the machine shop? Well, because Mr. Ass Clown said they're okay, and the director is backing him up. Insert curse words from these guys. We then briefed him on the plan, and he was somewhat happy. So, about 2 weeks later, our trap sprung. Our assembly unit, who I'd already spoken to, needed these particular parts, and they received the ones that weren't made correctly, so of course they contacted their boss, who, according to the plan, didn't contact my boss, since he was away, but the director himself, about how quality control had really messed up. Of course, the director came flying over, howling and screaming about our incompetence, to which my partner and I calmly asked, "So, it's about those specific parts creating this particular problem?" "Well, yes, you bloody morons." The director then called for Mr. Arsclown to come and straighten us out. Mr. Arsclown stood there, all smug, expecting his next big promotion, but we called storage, and asked our storage worker to bring up the pallet with the remaining goods and the schematic that had a very neatly approved by Mr. Arsclown, signed production manager written on it. The half a second it took him to realize that these goods that risked delaying the shipment, and thus costing a small fortune in delays, had been greenlighted by him was priceless. His face went from, "Oh yeah, I'm securing a seat at the next production manager," to, "Oh crap, I'm gonna get fired for this." He was later told to stay right away from the quality control department, and my partner and I, as well as our boss, celebrated with cake. Now that was epic. And now we're on to our next post by Augustinus33. Try to steal our credit for the work you didn't do? I'll ruin your election. I never thought that a story like this could happen to me, but I have been gifted. Main persons involved are Jane, the liar and cheat, me, my friend John, Justice Simp, these will make sense later, Justice Hero, and Justice Beast. Other persons involved will be introduced as needed. Details left vague to obviously protect the parties involved, but I don't mind revealing more details if asked. Let's begin this back in October of 2018. I am a sophomore in university and I've joined some student clubs. At this time, I wasn't too active in the club that is the subject of this story, but in October 2018, the president at the time, who we will call John, since they are a close friend of mine, was working on a project on campus. This project was to accommodate certain individuals on campus by allowing them to park in staff lots. On our campus, parking in the normal lots for these individuals could mean a 10 to 15 minute walk with their temporary impairment. So, parking in staff lots makes a whole bunch of sense. After months of being tossed around by different departments, John ultimately got the approval by going to the university president directly. In total, John had worked on this project for a little over a year. I was later elected in spring of 2019 as the club historian, and then the president in fall 2019. For a year and a half, things were going good. Our club asked about how well the project was doing since its initial start, and dozens of students with the particular impairment had been using it. We were incredibly proud to have made a difference on campus. John was especially proud, since it was basically their baby that they conceived for the campus. There was even a university and nationwide article published about it for our club. Introducing Jane. Jane was a classmate of mine who was in political science and had aspirations for public office where we live. They had been in some of my classes and was a well-known student senator on campus. Jane was pretty well known for being liked and popular. However, with those who have worked with Jane, like my friend John, Jane was infamous for being manipulative and to flake on things that didn't benefit her own interest. Lo and behold, this semester, yes, this spring, Jane did something remarkable. Jane took credit for John's work. You see, our university newspaper publishes the biographies of each candidate running for student offices. Jane was running for president. You may think, why is this such a big deal? It's just a student popularity contest. Well, yes and no. Yes to it being a popularity contest, but no because the students in office at our university control hundreds of thousands of dollars. The last reported number I saw was around $1 to $2 million in a fully student office controlled budget. If Jane was elected, Jane would have real power. Anyways, Jane had taken credit for John's work. Again, John had slaved for over a year to get the program in place at our university, and Jane just grabs the credit for it, saying that they created the program. In addition, Jane was a nominal member of the club, having only attended a handful of meetings and never attending events except in passing. John confronted Jane about it, to which Jane promised to change their bio. Ha! I bet Jane wishes they did. After a few days of no change, John emails the editor of the university page and asks if they can change Jane's bio, while also giving the due credit to John and the clubs affiliated with the actual work. The editor informed us that because Jane was not requesting the change themselves, the most that the paper would do is place a note at the bottom of the bio saying that what Jane said was false. This wasn't good enough. By now, the paper had been out for 2 weeks, and no one checks the online sources by now. John confronted Jane again, now demanding that Jane not only change their bio, but also publicly apologize and give credit to our club. So, Jane again promised, and we waited for another week, giving her ample time to make the change. By then, it was already election week. This was the very first week of the corona lockdown for our city. On the election ballot, Jane's bio had changed to say that she had initiated, not created, the program. She changed one word. One word. John and I were furious. We had to do something. But who would take this seriously? The student elected officials are all in an in-group, and there's no way we can get this by without some hard evidence. Then there was me. I spent a few days compiling text messages between John and Jane, emails by John from October 2018 to late 2019 to university departments, emails from John to the editor, and news articles officially giving credit to John and our club. Obviously, Jane was nowhere to be found in the email chains. Not even the meeting minutes for the University Senate had any record of Jane proposing the program to the Student Senate. We had her dead to rights on flat-out lying and stealing credit for the work that she didn't do. Unfortunately, I did not get the evidence compiled before the end of the student elections. Jane was elected as the Associated Student President. But wait, something glorious happened. A day or two before I submit my findings to the Student Senate, a post on the university Facebook catches my attention. It couldn't have been more beautiful. Right there was a screenshot of Jane DMing someone on Instagram, saying that if they'd vote for them, that they would be enrolled into a gift card raffle. Borderline bribery and incitement? You're damn right. In a matter of hours, the post went viral on campus. Hundreds of students demanded an explanation, with no official commitment by the Student Senate, campus administration, or external student affairs. The silence riles up the student plebs even more. To add salt into the wound, a particular student senator defended Jane, saying, "It was approved, get over it." Little did we know, this person would be very important later. After about 2 days of no actions, I finally have all I need. The emails, the texts, the bio screenshots, Jane's promises to change the information, and Jane's DMs to the people bribing them to vote. My case file was complete. I even managed to have John give me an official statement on the issue, which was approved by the national headquarters of our club. I PM'd the Associated Students' offices on Facebook, and I emailed their office manager and a few student senators, all my findings. I also CC'd the chair of the student affairs to make sure that they read my email, because whenever you CC upper leadership, they won't be happy at seeing bad stuff being said about them. A few days later, I got a response. All my findings were forwarded to the student court, which were the judicial community of the student senate. I also had no idea we had one, but apparently they have a good deal of power. Enough people were emailing complaints to the office that official cases were being brought up against Jane. 2 by Jane's opponents in the election, and the other by me. Within the week, I was invited to make my case against Jane. Trial day. Now the rules of the student court are rather laxed. If you've ever been a part of a mock trial, it was a lot like that, but with less formal rules on what you're allowed to present to the court. To add to this, due to Corona, we had to have the court session over Zoom. The setup is a whole other story involving explicit imagery from a troll. In the stupidity of it all, Jane had refused to show up to the online meeting. but was giving rebuttals via email? Before me, one of Jane's opponents went against her. For the sake of simplicity, I will summarize the both cases against Jane by her opponents. Basically, they argued that what Jane did was unethical. Even though no specific campus policy went against bribery, literally, they still argued that it was unethical and that the court should both recommend that the Senate amend the policy and punish Jane. Introducing Justice Simp. Remember that student senator who defended Jane on a Facebook post and told us to get over it? Guess who one of the justices on the student court was? That's damn right, Justice Simp. Conflict of interest? Yeah, definitely. For a solid 15 minutes, Simp was arguing with the other justices on whether or not to recuse himself. However, due to a lack of solid evidence detailing the relationship between Jane and Justice Simp, he was allowed to sit on the court. Now, before each election, every student candidate is required to sign off on a form stating that they understand the rules, that they are accountable to all rules and regulations even if they do not get elected. For all intents and purposes, the candidates are members of the University Senate policies. This is important because Simp tried to argue a technicality. The Student Senate rules are specifically worded to include only active student senators and members and faculty. Justice Simp argued that because Jane was bribing students, but not as a president/senator, that the rules do not apply to her. He literally said this. Justice Hero wasn't having any of it. The entire time, Justice Hero and Simp were going at it, with Simp oddly defending Jane to the death, while Hero was just trying to get the facts of right and wrong. When Simp's argument for technicality failed, he literally argued, how could Jane possibly know about the rules? In comes Justice Beast, another justice in the court who isn't having any of Simp's crap. Beast comes in strongly, reading verbatim the statement on the form that Jane signed when beginning their campaign, saying that they promised to comply with all university rules and regulations. Goodbye, vague loophole. You have been closed. When the court voted on whether or not Jane was guilty of bribing other students, the total was 4-1, with Justice Simp being that one guy who refused to accept the facts. Now, my case was a little bit different. Where the other cases were about Jane bribing other students to vote for them, my case was about Jane breaking the policies of honesty and integrity. The Student Officials Code of Ethics literally has a section about honesty and a section about fulfilling obligations that you promise and not taking credit for work that others didn't do. All the justices were forwarded my case as evidence, and it was my time to make my case against Jane. I presented all the evidence I mentioned before, elaborating to say that no one does anything like this unless you intentionally lie, including the literal change of one word. My nail in the coffin was the official statement by John, which detailed the entire ordeal in a nicely approved letter by the national leadership. Upon being questioned, Justice Simp tried to trip me up, asking how I knew Jane was active or not in the club. Me, having a few years of mock trial experience, declared that it would be hearsay for me to answer, as I wasn't an active member or officer during the time that Justice Simp was talking about. In order to get an answer, he would have to ask John, who was the president at the time. However, I did add that in the times that I was an officer, I only saw Jane 2 to 3 times over the last year and a half, nowhere near the levels of activity that Jane was claiming. Nice try, Simp, but your crap isn't going to work with me. Again, Justice Simp is stalling, trying to keep the court from voting on the issue. It's getting late in the night and we all want to leave. I am almost certain Jane was watching from a friend's screen while also messaging Justice Simp. During the deliberation, Jane emailed the justice her response, basically saying how the rules don't apply to her because she wasn't acting in the office of a student official. Justice Simp read Jane's response verbatim and still defended her. Justice Beast and Justice Hero had enough of Simp's crap, and called for a vote on the case. My case, being much more well documented and based on concrete university policies, held up ridiculously well. Especially when Hero and Beast brought up the ethics code about only taking credit for what you did. Simp shut up really quick. The end vote was 5-0. Even Justice Simp couldn't deny that Jane had flat out lied and stolen credit. I celebrated that weekend by buying some beers and enjoying myself, social distancing style. We are still awaiting the official punishment of Jane, but there is talk about removal of office as well as Justice Simp being investigated for conflict of interest in the cases. I've never been more satisfied to ruin Jane's campus political career, and it will likely ruin their future political career. I plan to email the evidence to politicians that Jane has or is working with. Update. Today the student court released its official decision on the case. As of today, Jane is disqualified from candidacy/student presidency, and the rules are to be amended to prevent others like her from bribing votes. I loved this part. Through evidence provided by OP, there was no documentation that showed that Jane had any part in the process of organizing the parking program. The student court even is changing the rules to allow the other justices to vote out another justice if they believe there is a conflict of interest. No one trusts Justice Simp anymore, haha. In a weird way, Corona has made this the best experience ever for me. Alright guys, that was r/revenge today. Tell me what you thought about these 3 stories today. They're really long and I love reading them out, so if you want more, please do tell me. I hope you guys have a good day, night, sleep, whatever you're up to today, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!